G'day, folks. Anthony, AOS Coach here, bringing you Faction Focus. Hashtag officially a real army. I'm so excited. They've got points in the General's Handbook. No longer are they a fake army. The Chaos Dwarves are back. Boys, how are we? Gabe, my first guest, how are you, sir?
Oh, mate, I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm well. So, Gabe, you are a renowned chuff player. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Am I allowed to say
Oh,
chuff, or is that like a derogatory thing? I'm not sure.
No. Other people can use that word. It's okay. Yeah, no, I've been playing Chaos Dwarves tournament-wise probably for about 6 months now. I've wanted to do the army for ages, and obviously there's some barriers in cost and all that kind of thing, but finally got the army on the table, started taking it to events, and just been loving it.
No, and I've seen your beautifully painted. I'm going to say chuff now, but I don't want people like backlashing the coach because I've said like a derogatory word. But I'm old school. I love Warhammer Fantasy. Seeing the Chaos Dwarves, it's nice to see them back. And yours is beautifully painted.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Speaking of another beautifully painted human being, we have Rhys from the Measured Gaming crew. Rhys, how are you, sir? Introduce yourself to the internet.
Hello, internet. I'm Rhys. I'm from the Measured Gaming group, along with all the other guys down there in Bendigo. I'm just based out of the western suburbs over in Melbourne. A couple of gaming groups down there in Bendigo and in Werribee. The main places I go to.
I love it. We got like a massive internet audience from like overseas, and they're like, we don't even know where that is.
Yeah,
have you heard of Melbourne? You're fine. It's there. I've been playing. Same question with Gabe. I've been playing the army for about a year now. Competitively, I've played Chaos Dwarfs on and off for probably close to 10 years though. They were one of the armies that I got back into when the game was originally fantasy. So they've always been a little chuff-shaped piece in my heart. Has been there for a long time.
No, I love it. I was actually looking at some of the old, what used to be called a battle tome. They used to be army books back in the day, with some really cool, like, far out. There was some awesome, like, hobgoblins and centauri type things. So this army deserves more than it should. Pat Nevin's in the chat giving you shade because it's hashtag fake army, but that is untrue. GHB, it has rules. It's legit. It's basically the best army in the world, and we're going to find out why, because you boys are going to tell us and why they're going to crush the meta. Is that right?
Oh, something like
100%.
Or are you going to downplay this and like all of a sudden surprise the Century CanCon?
No, go big or go home. Chorts are going to be number one.
All right.
Oh, jeez, mate.
All right, so you boys have a big pedigree. You've been playing with the Legion of Azgorh. I should use the proper terms now for some time. I guess maybe like give me an update. Like, who is this army? Do they have stories written about them? Are they just like a Forge World army that is half legitimized? Like, tell me about who is the Legion of Azgorh. Maybe I'll start with Gabe. You're a bit of a story man.
Yeah, I do love the story. In Age of Sigmar, they don't have a huge amount of lore at the moment. There's reference to them in the core book. There's a city in the realm of fire, I believe, that's run by the Chaos Dwarves. So they're mentioned in there, but there's not a heap of fluff and lore and stuff at the moment. In the old world, they had a lot to do with the Battalions and the creation of the Black Orcs and the Tamarkan campaign. When Tamarkan's horde kind of marches down through the Badlands, they encounter the Chaos Dwarves. They end up fighting them, and then they kind of sort their differences out and decide to go pillage and destroy. So they're a very ruthless faction in the lore. They're very, they don't care who they stomp on to get where they need to go, and everyone who's not a Chaos Dwarf is expendable, and they'll basically just crush everyone in their way if they can't use them.
I feel like I remember back in the day, the law was very much around slavery and kind of bringing people back in and working in the mines and just absolutely beating the crap out of them.
Yeah, definitely with the aesthetic and with the original lore for the old Chaos Dwarfs, 100% that was the case. They were, a lot of people have mentioned Babylonian inspiration, you know, old Persian armies invading and that sort of thing. A lot of, like, in the Legion of Azgorh in Tamorkan is the entire reason Draz decides to assist Tamorkan with invading the Empire is he's running low on slaves to work the mines. And so he's like, well, I can just go in and just take over all the villages and then leave when I need. And, you know, if this works out profitable for me, so much the better. And that's a lot of what the Chorfs are about, especially even going into the gameplay. They're a very what's the term? Dwarf-centric viewpoint in that regard. They're very selfish, very a black mirror of the dwarven qualities that we've seen and we've grown up and we love from Warhammer. Just sort of they're inverted and played up to 11.
Love it. And as an Empire player, go away, leave my people alone. feel free to go around the corner and go to Bretonia. Sweet with that, but don't touch the humans of Karl Franz and the almighty Sigmar. So what attracted you guys to slavery and butchery and carnage and, you know, just generally being bad human beings? Because Gabe, you're a relatively nice person. Rhys, I'm not sure. The chat's kind of giving you some shit right now, but like, what drew you to the evil side of dwarves? Rhys, I might start with you and let Gabe finish his wine.
Well, when I first started with the Chaos Dwarfs, is I was already deep into the dwarf lore. You know, Khazalid, all the Carracks that were around in the old world, and seeing and also I was also playing a lot of Chaos at the time. So Warriors of Chaos, they'd just gotten their 6th ed book. So the old, when we got the fur-lined Warriors of Chaos when they came about. And just seeing a lot of the aesthetic there in the older models that were available at the time really drew me in. And then I got reading into the lore and thought, well, they're Chaos Dwarfs, but on the surface level, that's what they are. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's the creation and the building side of things that the dwarf sort of epitomized, but like twisted to make things arcane and to make things really different. And they just had such a vibrant style, and they were very kooky back in the day as well.
And they still are pretty kooky. Like they
still are, yeah.
Very unique look.
Exactly it. And yeah, it was mostly the aesthetic, and then the lore sort of got me in a bit more. And then Legion of Azgorh really reignited that in that regard, and seeing the army allowed to be back on the table, really, back in fantasy. And now it's sort of fully epitomized here as well in Age of Sigmar.
Gabe,
even if we don't have as much lore yet for the guys here.
Just sounds like you guys can create your own narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Just do what was it Tyler Mengel did and just write your own battle tome.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I've seen that. How good does that look?
I think Gabe's working on one right now. So, but Gabe, how did you get into this faction, and what drew you into this?
So I kind of for the last 5 years or so, I've kind of leaned right into Chaos as a faction, and so I've collected different Chaos armies. I try and keep it in that, in that Grand Alliance, and Chaos Dwarves was one of those armies that it was very unique, and it was something that you didn't see a lot, but it was also, the models are I think the models are great. The Infernal Guard with all the plate armor and all that kind of thing was pretty sweet, and it let me play dwarves and still be Chaos. So I think it was a diverse army, because you've got monsters, you've got infantry, you've got war machines, you've got heavy cavalry. There was a lot in it. Like when you lay it out on the table, there's models of all different sizes, and I don't know, that kind of catches my eye a bit. And then no one else was really playing them, and I thought they were good, so I'm like, well, I'll give them a crack and see how it goes.
And you've done well with them. So What I just heard there is they've got a bit of a diversity in regards to they've got a bit of everything, and they've got a very unique look. Gabe, what are some of the other strengths that a Legion of Azgorh army might have?
So I think as the game's kind of embracing the shooting phase a bit more, I think Legion of Azgorh kind of shines because it's got high quality ranged mortal wounds, a lot of shooting that can trigger mortal wounds, and so it has an answer to a lot of things. Sorry, I've just blanked out completely.
That's all right. That's all right. We'll sub in Rhys. What are some of the other strengths that the army has? Because I tell you right now, like there is a really cool range of models. I really like the diversity of like the Kadai fire. Then you've got these big, massive war machines, and then you've got your generic Chaos Dwarf with their shooties. What are some of the other strengths, Rhys?
So yeah, definitely a lot of what Gabe was mentioning, and just sort of touching on those is it's primarily a control-based sort of army. So a lot of what you want to do is pushing your stuff forward and choosing where you want it to be applied. So you've got the long range to pick things out when you need. You've got mortal wounds when the opponent has lots of armor. You've got units that have high volume of attacks to deal with hordes, and it's really just finding the right blade for the right situation, really. Like you've got slow armies because it's a slow army, except for maybe one or two units. You've got your dwarfs still at the end of the day, but you've got those other things you can fall back on, unlike say the fire slayers that rely a lot more on board presence and bullying, and you've got Caradrons that have the ships to fly them around. The Chorfs have to rely on their shock troops to pull the movement shenanigans, and yeah, so you've really got to be on the ball in that regard to things to make sure that you get the best out of each of the units. But
so movement's a weakness. Yeah. So I guess on the other side of the coin, we've got some strength around diversity and mortal wounds and ranged attacks, and they've got some really cool hats. I guess that's a strength. I love hats.
Yes, 100%.
If you like that hat kind of like even plaited beard look, that's a strength. And like dwarves, traditional dwarves outside of your boat-faring dwarves, they have minimal movement. It's quite tough. What else? Are they an expensive army from a points point of view? Certainly, they're a Forge World army, so getting access to models is definitely difficult.
Yeah.
What are some of the other challenges and weaknesses? I might throw to Gabe.
Yep. So obviously, I mean, in Australia, I think cost, like financial cost, is definitely a challenge. But when it comes to gameplay, I think mobility is a challenge. They don't have a great deal of options when it comes to magic. They've got a couple of wizards, but there's no like spell law or anything like that. And there's no movement spells, which is a challenge. Obviously, you can, with different endless spells coming out now, you've got the dinghy and the bridge. They open up some things to counteract that weakness of being a movement 4 army, essentially. And you will find that every unit that dies from your army is a big deal, because it's a relatively low model count army, unless you're building a horde of infantry.
So is it an elite army? Is that?
I play it relatively elite. You see, there's a couple of people, Rob run something like 90 or 120 riflemen or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't, because I don't own 90 riflemen, but so I run a pretty elite army, which is a nice change from a lot of my other armies. Like I came straight from Beastmen into Chaos Dwarves, so it cut the model count down significantly, but it does mean that every time you lose a unit or you lose a model, it does hurt.
Yep, that's fair.
I'd have just
just a quick question for someone like, if I was studying an army from Forge World, compared to, let's say, the average generic army that I'd start at Games Workshop, what's the price difference? Are we looking at, 2 times the cost, 3 times the cost? Is it only a little bit smaller? I guess just from like an expectation point of view.
I'd have to say, depending on if you go for the bulk lots, so the Execution Herd and the Ironsworn Warband, you could be looking at as low as 1.5 times a standard medium-sized army, all the way up to, if you want to get all the bells and whistles, get one of everything, you're looking at probably about twice the cost. It's not prohibitive, but it definitely is a price tag barrier that a lot of people have to know going in, so they don't waste money on expensive resin toys.
Yep, and that was just the point that I wanted to make, was that it is a great army, but one of the weaknesses definitely is one, the accessibility. I guess if I've got a tournament coming up next month, I can't just walk into Games Workshop and shift the meta and get more shooters or more war machines, because I need to order it from Forge World. It takes a minimum time frame. I've got the UK pound kind of conversion, which could be quite expensive at times. But alternatively, and obviously the reseller market can be quite challenging as well, because not many people are reselling the Chaos Dwarves, and if they are, stripping resin is a lot harder than stripping plastic. So keep that in mind if you're starting an army. Know that it can be quite expensive.
Yeah, it can.
Beautiful models, like they definitely deserve the price tag. They're awesome, but it is not as easy as some others.
No, definitely. I think, like, when you look at it for the Australian dollar, at least, a unit of 10 infantry is, I think, $100, and that doesn't include command. That's just 10 rank and file dudes. So you're looking at a pretty expensive army, but at the same time, it's probably not that much more expensive than the 90 Witch Elf Daughters army that was floating around. So it really depends. Like, you can do it affordably, and you can, do conversions and do it that way, use a lot of plastic kits if you wanted to. But if you're going all the Forge World models, it's on the higher end of financial costs, certainly.
Awesome. And I don't want to harp on the cost. I just wanted to call it out. That is something to consider if you are going to start this army. And, choosing the models might be something you need to put a bit more time into, as well as, factoring in even just the delivery time. So we talked a little about strengths, a little bit about their weaknesses. If I go to Legions of Azgorh, do I get an allegiance ability, or am I stuck under Grand Alliance Chaos? What do I get for swearing my allegiance to the Chuff Lords?
Chorf Lords.
Rhys, do I get anything?
You keep saying Chuff, it's Chorf Lords.
Is it Chorf? Is it? Sorry, I offend. Thanks for pulling me up 21 minutes into the stream. So
I didn't want to talk over it, but I was like, I'm sure he'll correct himself at some point. No, so Chaos Dwarves, they do get an allegiance ability. They got one from second ed onwards.
So that's in the General's Handbook. I can find that. Where do I find that?
It's not in the General's Handbook. No, it's in the army book they have available on the Forge World website, and it's also available on the Azir app under Legion of Azgorh Allegiance abilities. It has all the items listed there for the army, so it's nice and accessible. It's unfortunately not in the GHB, but it's like a lot of those other armies, it's in its own army book. It's really threefold. The first two are sort of the lower end ones. You get access to Burning Skies and Fireball from the Realm of Fire as an allegiance ability that affects your opponent. The Burning Skies affects your opponent, and Fireball is available to all wizards in your army. So that's a pretty cool little neat lore that they bring the Realm of Fire, and they're so in tune with it that they sort of warp the area around them to more resemble where they are based from. And the other one, which is probably the most important allegiance ability that they have, is their Black Shard armor. So they're forged in, rune-etched brass armor, that what it does is for each unit in your army, you can ignore the first wound that's allocated to the unit during each shooting and each combat phase each turn. That's for every unit. They get an option to ignore a wound. Very similar to the Lord Arcanum's heal effect. You know, when you take a wound that would kill a model, you heal a wound instead. It's just very slightly. It's more in fluff ways. It's more in the regard to you're stopping the wound as opposed to healing him back. But it works functionally the same.
Great.
Yeah.
Anything else, Gabe? Do I get anything else, or is that like that?
No, I was about to say black shard armor doesn't sound like much on paper until you start using it, and you will drive your opponents up the wall because you've got pretty good saves across the board, and you can get after saves on certain things, and then they chip through 2 wounds and you drop 1 and just ignore it, or they'll put 1 wound through and it just does no damage. So yeah, it's black shard armor is excellent. It's a very good allegiance ability.
It definitely lets you really play towards the Chaos Dwarf's strength of attrition, because every wound they're pumping out to you in every phase, you're just weathering through, and you're going to come out the other end of it with more bodies on the table than they are. Hopefully enough that you can still take objectives. But yeah, no, it's very powerful. It doesn't look that good on paper, but as soon as you start using it, 100% will drive your opponent mad with it. It's fantastic.
Love it. So on top of all of this, and some armies get allegiance terrain. Is it fair to say that there is no allegiance terrain for the legions?
No,
unfortunately not.
There's no allegiance terrain, and there's no endless spells, which is a bit of a shame. But you know, the nature of being a Forge World army is sometimes you don't necessarily get as consistent updates as some of the mainstream armies.
Well, that's exactly it. Is, you know, we have got command abilities and elite and artifacts, but yeah, terrain and endless spells we're missing out on. And the army has been slowly getting models added to it, but the main range is from 2000 and I want to say 2011.
Yeah.
I believe when the main range came out, and they've been adding to it since then. Maybe even earlier, maybe even 2009. But even then, like, the models are that old, like finger quotes old. They're still fantastic. They stand up to a lot of the stuff that's coming out now. Even in some ways, they're starting to slowly show their age, but they're still fantastic kits to work with. But yeah, no, unfortunately, it does mean the slow release schedule means you're going to be playing with the same toys for a while.
Yeah.
No, that's fair.
Oh, sorry.
No, please go on.
No, I was going to say there's the model range is probably the biggest challenge because you don't get a lot of, you know, you have the range and you know pretty comfortably that that's what you're going to be working with fairly long term. We haven't had many new models since that first wave. It's been, I think it was the Warhammer World Demon Smith and shar'tor the Executioner, I think, are the only models that came out after that first release. So we're kind of working with what we've got. I'm not sure. I mean, there's things like the Skullcracker where the molds broke a couple of years ago, and that's been out of production for a long time now. So you've got challenges in whether you, well, it's, you know, the only option left with the Skullcracker is really converting one because the actual model is out of production and apparently was a nightmare to assemble. Just looking.
Oh, it is. I have one. It's a monster.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic model. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of intricacy to the kit that I'm glad I'm not having to emulate a second time.
Yeah.
There's also a couple of third-party people out there that if you're not playing with the Games Workshop store, obviously, and your opponent agrees to it, you can potentially run as well. There's a guy that's done a Skullcracker-sized Kadai that you can use, for instance, and things like that. But that's just in terms of the model range for the allegiance abilities and Yeah, I don't think we'll be getting terrain or endless spells anytime soon, unfortunately.
No, I do have to call out the most Australian thing you just said, because there is some international guests in our stream. Rhys saying, yeah, nah, yeah. That was pure Australian gold. Yeah, nah, yeah. Or nah, yeah, nah. Fantastic. So no terrain piece, no endless spells. This is going to be nice and easy. And certainly there is no sub allegiance where, Daughters of Cain have temples, Stormcast have chambers. You have the Forge World special, and that's it. It comes with one allegiance, well, a set of allegiance. That's it. So we're going to build a list now. We're going to say, right, I'm going to go into Forge World. I've refinanced my house. I've divorced with. I've hidden all this money under my bed away from my wife, and I'm going to buy an army from Games Workshop. Where do I start with the Legions of Azgorh? Do you guys start with a battalion in mind? Do you start with heroes or behemoths, or what comes through your list design process at the start of the tree? Gabe, I'll start with you first. Where do you start?
So for me, there's a few standout units that I think should be in every list, and they are the Bull Centaur Torok, Fire Glaives, and Kadai Fireborn. They are all standout units. They're great value for their points. You will get use out of them every game, and in an army where you kind of have to be smart about your purchases, they are three very safe purchases.
So you actually start with the unit choices in mind before you start then optimizing. Is that fair?
Usually, yeah. So I'll almost always have a Torok in my list, pretty much no matter what. Of the battle line options, you have Ironsworn.
I'm gonna pause you there.
Yep.
I just want to find out where you start. So you're starting with units.
Yeah.
That's all right. You're getting excited. You're getting excited with all those options to build your army with. Rhys, where do you start? Are you similar, or do you start with heroes?
So in terms of actually starting from the baseline for the army, do you mean, or when I'm building an army, I'm getting pen to paper?
So when I speak to other guests, they might say, well, look, I start with a temple in mind. Like I'm Daughters of Cain, and I'm going to start with Hanna. And then from Hanna, I'm going to optimize my my witch elves. But for
I'd definitely
other
be
people,
starting with a knight.
No, go on.
Sorry. I'd definitely be starting with where I want the army to be going towards on the battle, because you're limited in your options for that regard. So if I wanted to go shooting heavy, I'd definitely be looking at Fire Glaives. Kadai as a support shock units, I'd be looking at that. In terms of purchases, I know the two standout ones I can think of are the ones I mentioned earlier, Black Shard Warhost and the Bull Centaur Execution Horde. If you started off with those as an army and then worked out the unit choices from there based on what you want to run around them, it gives you one of everything except war machines, and it costs you just shy of about $1,000 of Australian dollars. So I believe pound wise, it works out to about £500 or £600. I can't quite remember.
That's right. We're about conversion.
Yeah.
They can,
but yeah, they can work that one out. But yeah, and that definitely gives you a good core to start with, and then it's really where you want to take the army. If you want to put a lot of boots on the ground, you go more into the Ironsworn or the Fire Glaives. If you want to go a more shock troop army, you look at the Execution Horde. You look at the battalions that we have available. The battalions really help you build the army the way a temple host would. So we can get into it later.
Yeah,
but we have
let's get into it now.
So very different things. Oh yeah.
What I'm hearing is that unit choices and the style of army you want to build is probably more important than some people that might go, right, I build around Marathi. I'm going to build around a certain battalion or a chamber. But for you guys, it sounds like the unit choice and the style of, do I want to be long range shooting, war machines, and things like that. So let's talk units. Let's start talking units first. And when I look at your different unit choices, you have 4 unit choices, 2 that are battle line when you are Legions of Azgorh. So you've got your Bull Centaur renders, you've got your Infernal Guard Fire Glaives, you've got your Ironsworn, and then you got your Kadai. Yep. But your Kadai are not battle line, and nor are the Ironsworn. Oh no, your Ironsworn are. So you've got 3 battle line, and Kadai are not battle line.
Yeah.
Where do you guys start? Which ones are the good choices? Where do you build your battle line? Are you MSU? Are you maxing out? Talk to me about some of your choices. I'll start with actually Gabe. You start first.
Yep, no worries. So when it comes to your standard units, we'll talk about battle line first. Battle line's probably, I mean, it's compulsory in every army, so that's usually something that I tick off as, you know, they're the first things I tick off is I make sure I got my 3 battle line. For me, so Bull Centaur renders are only battle line if shar'tor is your general, right? Oh, honey. Sorry, my daughter's just walked in. Can I talk to Rhys for a second? Sorry.
Hello, little chaos dwarf. Rhys, tell us more.
2 minutes.
Yeah, so just what Gabe was saying was the Bull Centaurs are only available if you have a special character who's your general, which does limit a bit of the options there. So the main 2 you're looking at are Ironsworn and Fire Glaives. Now, of the 2, they feel very different roles. The Ironsworn are cheaper. You can get more boots on the table, and they're there they get a Horde discount as well. So that further adds to the mentality of putting the boots on the ground. Whereas the Fire Glaives, you can run either as a large unit to help with battle shock and with movement and such, and drops for the army. Or you could take it MSU and really try to push the advantage that the Allegiance ability gives you for each of your units, because obviously the more units you have, the more wounds you get to ignore throughout the game.
So would you go large unit blocks, or are you thinking more take small unit choices so you can spend big on monsters and war machines?
Well, it's really down to the list you're building. So if I was going a war machine heavy list, I'd probably take in 1 big block of Fire Glaives and then 2 smaller blocks, or I might take a massive block of Ironsworn. 30, get the Horde bonus, and just start pushing them up the table to deal with the opponent. In terms of you can't really go wrong with your battle line, at least in those options. I'd always say choose the same battle line each time, so you're not diluting the options you have. So you're
saying, like, in a 2,000 point game, you would take 3 units of Fire Glaives or 3 units of Ironsworn.
Unless I was running the battalion, yes, yeah.
Yeah, of course, like if a battalion dictates your army, but you're saying it's better to kind of go niche and kind of try to get that optimization, that synergy, as opposed to a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I think that's something I haven't really, me or Gabe haven't mentioned at all yet, is the army doesn't really have much synergy outside of maybe 1 or 2 builds. So we're missing a lot of you can't take a character to buff a unit to get rerolls to do this. You're relying on the stats of the units. So that's where the options come down to either you're focusing on what the army needs to do. That's why unit choice is more than synergy is sort of where we started. I guess we probably should have led more with that with the army. It probably would have made a lot more sense to the listeners. So that's why taking 3 of the same just gives you redundancy, as opposed to giving you the options of synergy later down during the battle. It just lets you play around that side instead.
And if I wasn't taking a battalion, maybe Gabe, if I wasn't taking a battalion, what do you think is the better or stronger battle line choice? Is there one?
I think I think Fire Glaives all day.
Yeah.
You compare them to Ironsworn, and they do almost everything that Ironsworn do, but with a 16-inch gun.
And only 10 more points.
Yeah.
Oh, no, 10 points less. No, 10 points more.
Yeah,
because Fire Glaives are 100 and Ironsworn are 90.
Yeah. But the way I look at it, I look at 4-inch move on a combat unit compared to 4-inch move on a unit that can punch mortal wounds across the board from a 20-inch threat range. And to me, that's an easy choice every time. I don't think I'd ever run a unit of Ironsworn.
I have tinkered around with them in a Horde, which is the only place they really win out against the Fire Glaives. But pound for pound, Fire Glaives just deal more damage, and they deal nearly as much damage in combat as well because they're armed with halberds. They're very multi-purpose. and that makes them really useful in my eyes because I love having mixed arm style units. But the Iron Sworn, the biggest option you want to use them for is 240 points for 30 dudes is a pretty decent deal of it compared to most armies. But that's really their selling point more than anything else.
What do we think of Bull Centaurs?
I
I love the models.
Yeah.
And by the way, for anyone who's watching this, if you are a hobbyist or you're buying models because you like them, awesome, keep it up. You know, it's your hobby, do what you want to do.
Yeah.
I guess I'm talking to Gabe and Rhys around building that more competitive, you know, especially if you're thinking about winning a tournament or you want to do really well in your local scene. We're looking at more like optimized kind of lists as opposed to picking your favorite models. And if you want to run a whole army full of Bull Centaurs and, you know, is it shar'tor?
Yeah.
I'm sure I've mispronounced that like my chook thing. But yeah, so this is optimization. So you've laughed at me when I've asked you about the Bull Centaur because I imagine it's like the best unit in the world. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, auto include every list. No, unfortunately,
you guys are taking the piss. Why don't we like them?
Yeah.
Okay. The reason that I don't like them is not because the rules are bad, but they're basically Mournfang cavalry with an extra 40-point price tag on them. That's the biggest issue with them is they're so much more expensive than everything else that does the same thing in the game, really.
So they're 180 points for how many models?
For 3.
But you get 5 wounds, right? So that's 180 points for 15 wounds.
Mournfang cav. Yeah, 140 points, and you don't get the option for Gargant hackers. So they lose out on sheer damage potential compared to units in the same point slot. They lose out on units of the same role, and unfortunately, the only real way to get them into a list and make them stick is one very fun looking build you can build with them, which is the Execution Herd. Which we can get to in terms of like niche armies later. It has some legs to it, but it's you're polishing. You're pushing it uphill to really get it to work. When you have a unit that's cheaper, faster, better, and has nearly as many wounds.
All right, so
I
can read the undertone here because you had 2 shit references that you didn't follow through. You started talking about pushing shit uphill, and you didn't talk about it. Then you started talking about pushing. Okay, they're hot garbage. That's fine. Gabe, would you disagree with that, or should we just move on to Kadai?
No, I think I just don't think they're not great. I'd love them to be great. I own some, but I wouldn't put them on the table. I think there's a lot of other things that do far more for the same points.
Yeah, I imagine this is the type of army that has a 2,000 point army is hard to build because you've got some nice big fun toys. And if you can't get that, I don't want to say optimization, but if you're looking at this going, no, it doesn't really do what I want it to do. Like I do a Rob Symes and I get in 15 Kadai or like 21 Kadai, whatever he had. Because that's fun, right? These big fire elementals that burn you and let's talk Kadai. I like them. They're like my favorite unit in the Legions. Do you guys run them? How do you run them? Why do you run them? Or am I just blindsided by the beautiness of the model?
They are excellent. I run a unit of 12 in almost every list I write. So you get, for 480 points, you get 12 of them. They've got 4 wounds each. They've got a 5-up ethereal save. They do 5 attacks with a 3-inch range, which is a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And each of those attacks do D3 damage. So the damage potential on them is massive. The only drawback with them is they don't have any rends, so you just got to try and punch through armor saves. And usually you can compensate with that for pure weight of attacks. Because a unit of 12 with a 3-inch range, usually you're getting the whole unit attacking. And that's 60 attacks that are doing D3 each. So there's a lot of damage potential there. The other weakness they have, especially in a big unit, is that they are only bravery 6, so you need to babysit them, and you need to have a command point in the pocket. That's where 90% of my command points will go in a game.
They are allergic to battle shock, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll pour most of my command points into that big unit of 12. It is a big chunk of points. You're looking at a full quarter of your army pretty much, but in the right matchups, and if you use that unit well, you can do some serious impact on the game, and it's a unit that people cannot ignore.
And I like the fact that it's essentially ethereal, so it ignores rend, very much like a Nighthaunt unit. The interesting mechanics when you're in combat with them is at the end of combat, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, they do a mortal wound as well. So you're kind of punishing people from being in combat. So if their bravery is 6, which is pretty bad,
it is bad.
Why would you take a big block of 12 as opposed to splitting them up into 2 6s or into minimum units and having more of them?
So the reason that I run a big block of 12 is it's the only unit in the army other than Drazoth who it can fly and it can run and charge, and it's movement 8, which is something that the army as a whole, like speed is a big issue, and getting to where you need to be is a big issue. And so I'm willing to sink a huge chunk of points into that unit, knowing that I can fling it over the top of screens. I can mash, like against Gloomspite Gits, they can get around Fanatics pretty easily, because what you can do is you can hit the front line, sit outside of 3 inches of the Fanatics that drop out, and then when you pile in, you're going first, because at the start of the combat phase, there's no one in range of the Fanatics. So there's ways to, I think I said that right.
I wouldn't do that to you anyway. Like
no.
ignoring rend is like Fanatics bane. Like that's a big waste. But yes, I know what you're trying to say. Wouldn't work against me, but
I think that unit counters an otherwise very serious weakness in the army.
Mm-hmm. And another thing as well is it's a bit of a less important thing in terms of the unit itself and performance. But just having one big unit, it lowers your drops. And with an army that doesn't really have battalions, it can fall back on. Spoiler alert. It does need to sort of drop the drops down as much as it can, and it lets you, if you do cast buffs from allied wizards or from like command abilities now that we have them available in pitch battle, etc. It really lets you just be a bit more efficient, as opposed to spreading that out across, maybe 2 or 3 units, when you could just have one unit with a huge range, so you're not losing models from attacking as you normally would by having 2 or 3 MSU units that are spread out, or one big unit, sorry, that would be spread out and not attacking with everything. This unit normally can, and that helps you also stick the buffs, so you're not wasting turns putting, say, demonic power or casting or spending a command point to rerolls to hits. You're not wasting that if 2 or 3 of them can't fight that turn, because they've only got a 2-inch range.
So it sounds like we want to maximize our Kadais. We want to mitigate that the risk of battle shock, especially with such a low bravery and such a high value. So I think Gabe, you mentioned babysitting. So keep that in mind with your strategy to make sure that you don't lose them to battle shock, because that is a very expensive battle shock.
Big time.
One other thing as well that we forgot to say, they have a Horde. They have a Horde discount. So getting from 9 to 12 costs you 60 points as opposed to 140.
Outstanding.
So that's definitely also another driving point for them as well.
Great. Anything else you want to talk about with the unit point of view? I think we've talked about the 4 key units that you have outside of your war machines and things like that. Any other call outs, or if you are building a list, what is that? What is those? At least, what are your unit choices looking like?
I think it's hard to go wrong with Fire Glaives and Kadai. They're both pretty safe purchases. They're both gonna get results on the board. You know, there's always going to be a use for them in the army and in the game. So I think they're definitely the standouts. Ironsworn and Kadai, Ironsworn and Bull Centaurs are kind of, it's not that they're horrific, they're just not the best. There are better options. So, yeah.
And when you put them next to those two, it's chalk and cheese, unfortunately. That's the biggest comparison you're going to have with them. Ironsworn are next to Fire Glaives, Renders are next to Kadai, and they have options that are already there that are better. But yeah, definitely those two. I've been running lists with 30, 10, and 10 Fire Glaives, 3 units of 20, 3 minimum units of 10 to focus on more in the army. Every time they've delivered on what I've wanted them to do on the table. Same with Kadai. I started off with 3 Kadai in the first tournament that I played in because it's unfortunately the army is very is just hard to get hold of. But slowly I've been adding to them. I had 6 at CanCon. I had 9 at the most recent tournament I went to, and hopefully in the future I might have 12. But it's just getting a hold of them is the next step. Really, more than anything else.
I think Rob Symes had a big unit when he was running them around.
Rob Symes has probably bought out 4-draw. That's why it's taking so long for all the rest of us to get them.
So we've talked units. You have 6 hero choices. I don't know if they're all good. So curious. So you've got your Bull Centaur Tauric, you've got your Demon Smith, you've got how do you even pronounce that? Drazhoath? Good lord. That thing's dead to me. You've got your Battle Standard Bearer. That is OG Warhammer Fantasy Battles. You've got, so let's talk about your hero choices. You've got 6.
Yep.
Are they all good, or do we have this kind of really good and not really good kind of tier?
They're kind of in 3 tiers in my mind. So at the top, if you're looking at, let's say we're talking match play, we're talking efficiency, you're looking at Bull Centaur Taurox. They're just these mini monsters that race around the table. They got 5 attacks that are rank 2, damage 3. So you can throw them into something big and you're going to dent it. I always have at least 1 in my list because they're just a solid choice. And then the other one in that top kind of bracket is the Demon Smith. It's a cheap wizard. It's got a great spell. So Ash Storm, which is its War Scroll spell, has a 36-inch range, which that in itself is excellent. And then so they're probably the 2 standouts. They're good value for points. They function well on the table, and you're going to get a good amount of use out of them. So again, if you're looking at purchases, if you're planning out an army, they're probably the 2 standouts in my mind.
Rhys,
I definitely agree with all of that. I definitely agree with all of that. As the Torok it's a Doom Bull for 20 more points with 2 extra attacks and is faster on the table. And the Demon Smith has one of the best debuff spells on the game, especially in the meta where a lot of things want to run and charge. A lot of things want to drop their to-hit values or reroll to hit. And just having that cheeky debuff just to force it through and make them not have as many options, it pays for itself for a mere 100 points. And the buffs he gives to the war machines as well, which are more on the war machines themselves as the rule, but they're still relevant in that regard as well. One other thing with the Demon Smith is it doesn't really come into play, but he's actually okay at combat, and he has a grenade that he can throw that is on a hit. It's a shooting profile, hits on a 2+. So it doesn't hit on a 2+. You use the effect like a snowball, and on a 2+, you deal D3 mortal wounds to a unit within 6 inches, and if it's a war machine, you deal D6. Very rarely comes up, but it helps you clear chaff off of your war machines when they're being harassed, like harpies, canaries, etc. And it's just another little cheeky option.
That's awesome. So that's the I guess the top of the tiers when it comes to heroes. What's the middle kind of tier looking like?
So, and these are, I don't know if Rhys agrees with me. These are like my
Just own it.
opinions.
Own
So
it. You
anyone
just
dis-
own it.
Own that. Yeah.
You are the Runax. You are going to own it.
So the middle tier for me are the two other foot dwarf characters. So you've got the Infernal Guard Castellan, which is basically a captain, and you've got the Battle Standard Bearer. The Battle Standard Bearer has a 16-inch aura, which gives +1 to bravery, which is a big deal in the army. As we talked about with Kadai, bravery is a problem. And it also has a reroll. I think it's reroll 1s to wound.
Yes.
But I think it's if you stand still. I'm not super familiar with him. I haven't used him that much. But he's good. He's not bad. Again, it's one of those things where when you're scraping for points, it's easy to justify something else over him. The Castellan, which is like the captain guy, he's great in combat. Like for his points, he's a juggernaut in combat. But the problem is, again, you've got a combat character with a 4-inch move, which in itself is an issue. You can give him artifacts and stuff to make him faster. Obviously, there's some generic ones that can speed him right up and give him fly. But then you're putting your artifact on him and not some other possibly better choices. So they're kind of my middle tier guys. They're okay. They're pretty good. If there weren't better options, they'd be a shoe-in for sure. But the problem is that there's just other units that do it better. When you compare the Castellan as a 4-inch moving combat machine to a Torok, which is a 7-inch moving combat machine with better stats in every way, it's just good maths.
It's just night and day, unfortunately. The Castellan as well, probably the biggest reason you take him is he has a command ability that you choose a unit and your army gets +1 to wound against that unit until the end of the phase. To the end of the phase or end of the turn. Let me just double check that. The start of your next hero phase even. So even better. And that helps stack. If you run him and the Battle Standard Bearer, you're getting +1 to wound, rerolling wounds. You can start seeing some damage piling up just with that little bit of. It's one of the few options of synergy we really have in the army.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're attached to two very mediocre characters that generally don't see as much play as they probably should.
And the biggest problem that I see with that command ability, like +1 to wound is excellent. Like that's a great command ability, but it's got a 12-inch range and it's in hero phase. So your 4-inch dude has to get within 12 of someone and then have a hero phase without dying. It's
it's basically impossible if you haven't screened him out and get the double turn. Or if they've pushed really hard at you and he's sitting in a back line. It's another thing of like there's a lot of the things same with the renders where the unit is okay, and in any other army with a little bit of synergy backing it could do well. But in this army where it's selfish and it doesn't want to help out other units much, the captain yelling at a unit that's 12 inches away isn't going to help him when your army moves 4 inches. He's slower than Kadai.
How many heroes would you guys put in an army, an average like 2,000 point army?
I'd probably start with 2 to 4.
2 to 4?
At max, just really depending on like what allies we have as well for the list that I'm building. So I'd always start with a Torok and a...
I was just saying, I'm curious because you've mentioned that, this particular army isn't as reliant on synergies. So does that mean that you take less heroes? Does that mean that you don't even think about optimization? You just go for the best heroes and knowing that the buffs aren't as important? So Rhys, you're saying 2 to 5. Gabe, what's your strategy when it comes to
4.
picking heroes? 2 to 4.
Sorry.
No, Gabe, over to you.
It's me? Okay. So unless I'm running a very specific build, which we'll probably get into later, typically I run 3 heroes. So I'll run a Torok, I'll run a Demon Smith, and then I'll ally in a wizard from another faction. Usually one that has a good spell to buff the Kadai. So at the moment, you're looking at, for buff spells, I think the 2 best ones are a Chaos Sorcerer Lord. You can put him on a steed, which helps him keep up with them. And he's got demonic power on his scroll, which is a great buff for them.
Yep.
And the other one, which I'm a huge fan of at the moment, is the Contorted Epitome from Slanesh, which has a buff spell. It has 2 spells, 2 unbinds. It flies 12 inches, so it can also keep up with them. And it's also got the aura, which kind of lets the army play activation wars to a degree. Like, it gives them something to do in the activation wars.
Yes,
so
exactly, 100%. Yeah, no, 100% agree with all that sort of thing. It's the exact same list I'd be starting with in terms of what I'm looking at the table. Torok and Demon Smith are almost always auto-include, just because they're really good. It's as simple as that. And yeah, the next one is I'd be looking at either one of the cheeky options from the list that we have, which we haven't even gotten into 2 of them for, which I think we'll get to them in a moment. I'm the allied wizards, which is where I'd be going for. Or I have tinkered around with a couple of ideas. I've run shar'tor as the 3rd option once. I have run a 2nd Torok as well. So that's where the 4th hero comes in. So running 2 wizards, 2 Toroks, just a little bit of combat buff. Yeah, so that's really where it comes out. It's the exact same thing that Gabe was saying.
So what are the other 2 we haven't talked about? Is it the Battle Standard Bearer? Have we talked about that yet?
No, we've talked about him. It's the 2
good
named ones.
That's right.
The 2 named characters.
Yeah.
Drazoeth the Ashen and shar'tor the Executioner. So we'll start. I'll start on the. I can start with these ones if you want, Gabe.
I've got to say, I would imagine as someone from the outside that shar'tor would be one of the first I would pick. So I'm surprised that you put them at the bottom of your choice pile. Yes, tell me more about why the 2 named characters are the ones that you would pick the least or not as often.
I'll start with positives first, I think, just to sort of get everyone on a good page first. shar'tor is a Bull Centaur Torok with the same stat line. He deals mortal wounds on unmodified to hit rolls of 6 in addition to normal damage. He has a slightly better hoof profile, and his command ability lets you reroll charges on all Bull Centaur units within 18 inches. And additionally, he also has a nifty little mortal wound output mask in the hero phase. Draz, on the other hand, is a 15-inch flying wizard. I like to compare him to the Sorcerer Lord on Manticore, except he casts 2 spells. He unbinds 2 spells. He has a neat little shooting attack. He has a decent number of high damage attacks at his top profile. He can give Battle Shock immunity to your entire army on a 24-inch bubble for 1 command point, and his signature spell is an 8 to cast, but it deals D6 mortal and gives a unit -2 bravery until your next hero phase.
That sounds pretty good. Why aren't we taking him?
The unfortunate thing is that both of those characters are overpointed and then some. So shar'tor is 220 points. He's 60 points more than a normal Torok and doesn't do much more damage, and he's harder to protect because he's a special character, and you can't give him any you can't give him any buffs. You can't give him an artifact to protect him. He's on a larger base, so he's easier to shoot at and he's easier to surround. Draz, on the other hand, is 320 points, which isn't that bad for a mobile wizard, but he also has a 5+ wound save after the normal armor save that deals mortal wounds back, but it doesn't work on mortal wounds and it doesn't work on shooting. So he, especially moving into the shooting meta that we have moving forward, having 300 points flying around to get shot off the table turn 2 is never where you want an army to be. And his stat line drops like a brick out of an airplane as soon as you put 3 or 4 wounds on him.
I was going to say, I'm looking at his profile now, and it's like, starts at 13 wounds, has a base move of 15, has a 16-inch shooting attack. Obviously, as you said, was I think a double caster. You know, like that's not too bad for. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be a little bit overpriced, but if you're saying that the quality kind of dips pretty quickly, I guess it's hard to protect.
Yeah, he's I play Draz every now and then. I think of the two, he's definitely better, and he has a place depending on the pack that you're going into. So if you have a hero missions, you could put Draz out on a flank with little support, and either your opponent either has to deal with him, or risk losing on scenario because you have a flying bull on the objective from turn 1.
Gabe, agree or disagree with all this? Where are you at?
So I think the biggest issue with both of them at the moment, and the thing that kind of deal breaks it for me, is almost purely points. You look at shar'tor the Executioner, and I genuinely think that Bull Centaur Taurox, I think, are too cheap. They're probably, they could go up to 180. I'd still take them in a list. The fact that he's 60 points more, has more restrictions, and the majority, like his command ability, like reroll charges, is really good, but it only affects Bull Centaurs, which we've already discussed, maybe not that great. And so I think it's a shame, because he probably has the best model in the entire range. If you have a look on the web store, he's just a unit. He's the same height as a Great Unclean One.
Well, that's why I said to you that if I was starting this army, I probably would pick that as that'd be my starting point. It's just an incredible model, and when you see it on the table, it's gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
But it's just not living up to standards.
No, I think if it came down, like if he was 180, maybe 200, you're looking at it. But I think in his current form, I think he's too expensive. When it comes to Drazoth, the problem with Drazoth is that he's got 2 spells, he's got 2 unbinds, he can fly 15 inches, and he's got a 5-up. He's got his protection in combat and all that kind of thing. He doesn't do a great, he doesn't have a standout damage dealing profile. There's a couple that are good, but they're not you're getting 1 or 2 attacks with them. Yeah. The problem with him is, and the reason that I think he's now pretty much shelved for me for the moment, I can't see myself putting him on the table, purely because the contorted epitome exists.
Yeah.
So the contorted epitome is the mirror from Slanesh with the 2 ladies dancing on it, the jazz claws. It's 200 points. You also fly. You only move 12, but that's okay. You get 2 casts, 2 unbinds, re-rolling everything. You get a 2-up save against mortal wounds. It's for less points, you're getting more reliable casting. Is it more survivable? Depends what kind of damage you're taking. But for me, I can't justify an extra 120 points for something that my opponent will 100% take the first opportunity to kill.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's fair. I mean, again, you're so points restrictive in this army because there's so many things you want to do. Yeah. That is almost another 3 Kadai.
Yeah, exactly.
So that 100 odd points is better invested somewhere else.
Yeah.
Hell, I'm looking at your war machines now, and you've got 5 war machine choices. You've got a rocket launcher which is worth 120. So that gap straight away is 1 extra artillery piece.
Yeah.
So I don't blame you, but I guess at least you don't have to dip into your ally pool, and
that's true as well. And
I guess that's the trade-off.
And it is a shame, because they're kind of the 2, I guess, centerpiece models of the army, and they're both amazing models.
Yeah.
I own both of them purely because they're sick models. But usually they just sit on my shelf and look pretty. I don't usually take them to too many games. So
yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anything you guys would want to kind of wrap up in the hero phase, or we kind of talked about all 6 of your heroes, or if we're going to put them on the shelf, what's number 1, number 2, number 3? Not shelf isn't literally shelf them. What's our top heroes?
Torek, Demon Smith, and an allied wizard.
Gabe.
If we're going purely in faction, I'd say Torok, Demon Smith, probably the Battle Standard Bearer. You're going to get the most value out of the remaining.
Yeah, that's what I would honestly say as well. Yeah, it's definitely something I've looked at in the list.
Yeah, his aura is always on, and he doesn't need to stand still. So it's just good value.
Great.
Gives you a bravery buff, gives you a wound buff. You know, it's good value.
And we know we're going to sit within 2 to 4 heroes approximately, and maybe we will get to allies pretty soon. But that's kind of how we're looking at our hero choices inherently in the list. Yeah. We have 5 war machines. This is like OG. I love it. You've got your rocket launcher, the mortar. You've got your Iron Demon war engine, the magma cannon, and then back from the dead. Gabe, I want you to talk about this first, baby. The Skull Cracker war engine. Yeah. Now, what happened to that? And in the space of 2 weeks? It's like the rise again of the ultimate Skull Cracker. What happened, and why are we excited?
It was quite the emotional roller coaster, I'll be honest. So basically, as a bit of context, we talked about it earlier in the stream, but the Skull Cracker war engine sculpt broke a long time ago, and so it's been out of production for quite some time. When the most recent General's Handbook came out, Chaos Dwarves were in the handbook. They were kind of recognized as an official part of the game faction. Not that they were, they were always part of the game, but they were kind of official in the GHB, and the Skullcracker was the only unit that was missing from the entire roster. The GHB also said, if your profile isn't in this book, you can't use it. So for all intents and purposes, for that first initial release, the Skullcracker was, dead on arrival. And in a stroke of absolute wonder and everyone got very excited because they released the FAQ in the last couple of days, and the Skullcracker has been reintroduced to the army, and he is officially back on board. So my Skullcracker enjoyed about 2 weeks of retirement, but he is well and truly back out and back on the table.
Look at the joy on this man's face. He is so excited. The Skullcracker, it's back, baby. Is it any good? Let's talk about that one first. Is it any good, or should it have stayed retired?
Sorry.
I
say we save the Skullcracker. Save the Skullcracker for last. We'll talk about the other ones first. I think we'll build the suspension a bit. The Skullcracker is okay, I would say. It's all right. We'll get to him. We'll get to him.
Gabe, do you agree with Rhys, or?
The Skullcracker is mental. It is.
Yeah, 100%.
Pretty wild.
All right, let's build some suspense. A lot of S's in that little sentence. So let's talk about some of the others. You've got the rocket launcher. What do we think of it? Is it good for 120 points?
Rhys?
I'll take this one. So the Deathstreaker rocket launcher, in terms of the war machines, they all fill a very different role. The Deathstreaker is your indirect fire, mortal D3 damage output. It has a bunch of attacks that you can increase the number of if you're targeting a larger unit. You can get +1 to hit if you have a Demon Smith within 3 inches of him. Or maybe that's the other way around. Either way, you can get up to 4 attacks with 3s to hit. Yeah. And it has a huge range of 6 to 36 inches. It can shoot across the table, start shooting characters off and units off the table as early as turn 1. And you can hold it in the back line because it has a pretty decent survival profile with basically immune to shooting unless it's high rend. And it's only 120 points. It is the cheapest of the 3. Where you lose out on is the next war machine, which I'll throw over to Gabe to sort of talk about, is probably the most points efficient of the 3 by far. And it loses out on that by only being 20 points less than it. But the argument can be made that running 3 Deathstreakers can do you a lot of work.
Are you talking about the mortar or the magma cannon?
The magma cannon. Yeah,
okay,
100%.
Cool. All right, sweet. All right, so for 20 more points, Gabe, what do I get with my magma cannon?
So the magma cannon is a pretty solid piece of artillery. It's got an 18-inch range. If you're within 3 inches of a Demon Smith, that bumps up to 24-inch range. And how it works is instead of rolling to hit, rolling to wound, all that kind of thing, you roll a d6, and if you roll a 3+, the unit that you're targeting suffers that many mortal wounds. So if you roll a 4, they take 4 mortal wounds. If you roll a 6, they take 6 mortal wounds. You add 1 to that roll if you're targeting a unit of 10 or more. So if you roll a 6, that'll go to 7 mortal wounds. But most importantly, it ignores negative to hit modifiers. And basically, it's built for blowing holes in characters. You're pretty capable of... You got a 1 in 3 chance of one-shotting most foot heroes. They've usually only got 5 wounds. It's a solid machine. It's high-quality shooting. You are paying a premium. Like 140 points is, a decent points investment. You're getting 6 wounds for it. So they're not impossible to kill, but the trade-off is if you get a lucky shot early in the game, they pretty much pay for themselves. So they're a really solid war machine. They bypass a lot of the challenges from negatives to hit and look out, sir, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, they're a solid war machine.
And when it's next to that Demon Smith, it becomes a range of what, 24?
24, yes.
Which is very generous.
Definitely.
And a 3-inch move as well, so it has a 27-inch threat range. The amount of times I've just... there's a hero behind the screen that's providing 3 or 4 different buffs, or he's there for bravery immunity. 5+, take it off. Now the entire opponent's flank falls apart. The other thing as well is when we get to the Iron Demon and the Skullcracker, they have a cheeky little rule that helps out those guys even more. But I think we'll talk about the Dreadquake first. I reckon maybe just sort of get the red-headed stepchild done.
Sure, get that red-headed stepchild out of the way. But before we do that, if magma cannons are good, and obviously there's a nice little synergy between the Demon Smith and the magma cannons, would you take 2? Would you take 1 if you were going down this route?
So I've run a lot of lists recently where I've had 2 in the list. I did run 1 list with 3 at CanCon. I got a lot of dirty looks for that list. It did some rude things on the table. But I think 3 is a little bit too many. You've got to keep 1 Demon Smith within range of 3 chariot bases.
So potentially 2.
Yeah, 2 definitely can do work.
Gabe, would you agree?
Yeah, I'd taken 2 in my lists before. I took them to the Heats and to BrizCon with 2 cannons. They're easy to keep, within range of everything. 2's a bit more consistent. If you need something dead, you can pretty reliably kill it with 2. 1, if you only have 1, Murphy's Law, you're always going to roll that 1 or a 2, and so I think you take 2 or you don't take any.
That's kind of like what I was thinking, is that you wouldn't take 1. Ideally, you're taking a nice little combination of 2 magma cannons and a Demon Smith, because it's one of the few synergies you've got, it appears.
Yeah.
And it zones out so much of the board as well. You put down a snowball with a 27-inch threat range, essentially. And people just start freaking out and avoiding it like the plague. It really lets you play leaning more into the control aspect of the army. And definitely 1 will always miss, 2 will always hit. It's as simple as... It's just Murphy's Law.
So what's the next war machine we're talking about? The Dreadquake or the Iron Demon?
No, we can do the Dreadquake. That's kind of the next artillery kind of piece, I guess.
Sure. This is an extra 40 points, and we're now looking at 180 for the Dreadquake.
Yeah.
So Gabe, take us through the Dreadquake.
So it's it kind of fills the same. It fills the same kind of role as the rocket launcher, obviously with a higher quality, but it ignores line of sight. It's got a really long range. It's designed for smashing up high value units.
Well, its range is 40, right?
40-inch range, yeah.
That's
doesn't need line
huge.
of sight. So you're basically parking them on your back edge and bombing people from the other side of the board. The biggest problem with this is consistency, because you've got one attack. You've got one attack with your main gun. Now you can boost that up to 2 by whipping the ogre that's loading. There is a chance the ogre will turn around and do D3 mortal wounds to you, which is no fun.
So you hurt yourself.
You can hurt yourself. If you don't get the double shot, you hurt yourself, which is not great on a unit that expensive. And then the biggest thing for me is it's D6 damage, which sounds great until you roll a 2. You know, and it doesn't have, it's not super consistent to begin with. You're not hitting on 2s and 2s. You know, it's one of those units where you're paying a lot for potential.
This reminds me a lot of my Luminarch. So in the Collegiate Arcane, it's got 1 shot, hits on a 3, wounds on a 3, Ren 2, straight 6 damage. And this is a very similar profile. It's 4s, 3s, Ren 2, D6. So you go through all this effort and you've got 1 shot.
Yeah.
Now the problem is that you do D6 as opposed to my flat 6 until it's wounded. So you go through all this effort, and it's like 1, and you just cry.
Exactly. And I think it's one of those things where if you're playing in match play, one of the most important things is consistency and reliability. Taking a unit where you know it can probably do this job X, Y, Z. You know, and the mortar is one of those it's not even high risk, high reward. It's just sometimes it'll go off and other times it will kill like 1 or 2 models, you know, and it's just for the points and considering how tight the army already is for points and considering what else you can get for 180. I don't personally, I think it's probably the worst of the 3. Of the 3 shooting, you know, kind of artillery pieces, I think it's probably the least reliable out of all of them.
What I will say, if it's anything like the Luminarch, and I don't know if you guys have found this experience, but the Luminarch has a 32-inch threat range, so you've got a 40 on this particular piece.
Yeah.
I found the psychological damage is equally as powerful as the real damage. Is that, you know, when Gaunt Summoners on Bale wins, or, you know, with particular hero models that were just absolutely destroying face, by me having that 32 to 40-inch range threat, it made them reconsider. It made them change their game because they couldn't abuse me. I'm like, well, I can keep you in check. It didn't always happen, but that 40 inch is like, wow, wait a second. I'm really concerned you're going to take out my hero first turn. I don't know. Do you guys find the same thing?
I agree with that. I think there's like threat range is a big deal. The problem that the Dreadquake has is its threat range is so big. People are going to be like, well, I'm going to be in range no matter what, so I'll just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
You look at a magma cannon and you're like, oh, okay, there's a finite range that's going to really hurt if I go into it. But if you start the game already in range, it's kind of, there's not really a decision there because you're like, well, the only way I can stay out of range is to sit in the back corners of the table, which is not going to do anything. So, yeah, I 100% agree there's that control aspect, but I think its range is almost a drawback in that regard.
So maybe it's too big.
It's almost too big. Like, it becomes irrelevant. Yeah, a 40-inch range is, you know, that's massive.
You just accept it. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to get, if Gabe wants to hit me, he gets a choice of the whole table.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
especially if you put it in the middle of the back line, it's you cover everything but a corner.
Yeah.
I think with the Dreadquake, I've had a bit of a storied history with it. So I tried testing it out for a while, going a real big gunline list, 2 Dreadquakes, 2 Magma Cannons, and 2 Demon Smiths. That list was all right up until I looked at the list one day and went, I could drop both Dreadquake mortars and put in 3 of the Deathstreak rocket launchers, and it does more damage more consistently. The only thing it misses out on is that extra point of rend. And if you're putting it into hordes where you're getting the best value for rolling possible, the Ren's not going to matter as nearly as much as it does for the Dreadquake Mortar, which is going after higher value targets. And as soon as you realize that it gets outperformed by a cheaper war machine on averages, you really stop wanting to take it nearly as much as you have been. Which is unfortunate because it's another beautiful model. That it's almost a diorama in itself. It looks like an old railway gun combined with an Empire steam mortar.
Yeah, it reminds me of like
a,
Thomas the Tank Engine possessed by a demon.
Yes, exactly it. Speaking of Thomas the Tank Engine possessed by demons, the Iron Demon War Engine is probably
the
next
transition we got there.
Yeah.
So this is 180 points.
Nice trains-ish.
I'm
sorry.
180 points, the same value as the Dreadquake that we were just talking about.
Yep.
What's the lowdown on the Iron Demon? Rhys, I think you were starting to talk about it, and then I'll let Gabe finish us off with the Skullcracker, which.
Perfect. Yeah, he's busting for it. So the Iron Demon it's a large war machine crossed with a monster. It has a pretty decent shooting profile with a 2d6 shot gun with a 14-inch range, rend 1, damage 1. It's hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s with a degrading profile for the guns to hit profile or to wound profile. Gabe?
I wouldn't have a clue, sorry, mate. Couldn't say off the top of my head.
I'd have to double check that one, but one of those does degrade down, which does make it a lot less effective going forward. Yes, no, it's the to hit profile because the Skullcracker is to wound profile. And what you can do, the two big things with the Iron Demon and the Skullcracker is you can increase the pressure in the steam engine because they're both tanks. They're both actual tanks. They're both trains. They look like they belong on rails, moving all the carts around. And same with the war machines. If you go on the Forge World website, have a look at the aesthetic. They look like railway guns, and they look like things towed into battle. It's fantastic, almost a little bit of the the World War II mounted gun sort of flavor in there at times, and I like that a lot. So the big thing is the Iron Demon War Engine can tow one of your war machines. Now, what that happens is, as long as you start and end within an inch of the war machine, as long as you start within an inch of a war machine, you can give that war machine your movement profile on the Iron Demon, as long as that war machine ends within an inch of the Iron Demon. So the best way to do that is...
And unwounded, it has a movement of 10, so...
Yes, exactly.
Pretty remarkable.
You can potentially get that magma cannon that we were talking about earlier that has a 27-inch threat range. You run your Demon Smith up the table, you move your Iron Demon, you tow your magma cannon. Suddenly your magma cannon has a 34-inch threat range instead. And you're backlining enemies and shooting at them across the table because you still are allowed to shoot after towing the war machine. It just has to start and end within an inch. And the other big one for this is by increasing the steam during the combat phase of the weapon in choice, you can increase the random amount of attacks that the machine makes. Now, the risk that you have is if you roll over a 12 on that number, the machine takes damage because the steam, it overpressures itself, and the machine starts crumpling and venting steam and, falling apart. Because obviously pushing a demon into a water boiler and telling it to stay there when you set it on fire doesn't really play out the best of plans at times. But yeah, so you can increase his shooting profile from 2d6 up to 4d6. But yeah, if you roll over that 12, you do take D3 mortal wounds after the attack profile has finished. Now, there is a thing I want to talk about now with Gabe. Is this is a little bit controversial in the community as to how this works. We mentioned the black shard armor at the start of the game, start of the podcast. Now, there's two sides to this coin in saying how the rule works in regards to this ability. Because of the way it's worded for black shard armor, and it's allocated instead of allocating. It's instead of the way that it's worded for ward saves and such. Some people say that you can ignore wounds from the Iron Demon's gun when he overpressures itself, because mortal wounds become normal wounds after you've allocated them, which is when Black Shard Armor takes effect. Other people are saying it works the same as ward saves. You can't use them because wounds and mortal wounds are different things, which they both have valid arguments, I find. It's really down to, especially speaking from a match play perspective, definitely something you want to check with your TO each time, because there is not a consensus yet.
That was literally where I was going to go with this is
Yeah.
if you are going off that assumption, you definitely want to get a rule clarity so that you don't rock up
Yes.
to an event and there's a rule dispute and you had a strategy built around this. So
100%. Always double check with these sort of things. If you don't have an FAQ, then make sure to go to the TO because they have final say, and then just play the model how you would play under those rules. And that's
Gabe's a TO, and I think he's got something to say.
No, I was about to say, have you got the rules? Like, I was under the impression that Black Shard Armor was wounds and mortal wounds anyway.
No, so I'm not too sure though. Let me bring this one up now that I've said it. I believe it's only wounds, but it's wounds allocated instead of if you would allocate, something like that.
Yeah.
It's one of those odd things that sort of changes depending on who's reading it at the time. I think.
I think for the purpose of the stream, let's just get it checked.
Let's move on. I'll look into it quickly now, but you guys keep talking.
Sounds like a good war machine, but I think the best war machine of them all, the number one, he's back better than ever. It is the Skullcracker for 200 points. Gabe, why is this the best thing since sliced bread?
Okay, so you've got, for 200 points, you're getting an 11 wound model with a 3+ save. Starts off with a 10-inch move, scales down criminally slow. Like, you look at the scale chart and you take through, I think you take like 5 wounds and your movement goes down like 2 inches. It's not like, it scales down really slowly. And basically this thing can do all the similar things. It can tow guns. It can do all that stuff, but its true potential is launching into things and murdering everything in sight. So its main attack profile has the same 2d6 attacks. You can do the same thing. You can boost the engine, bump it up to 46 attacks that are each doing D3 damage each. And these do have rend on them. Unlike the Kadai, where you're kind of hoping that they fail some saves, this actually has rend on it. And you can throw it into a lot of things, like 4d6 attacks.
46, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, rend 1 for D3. That is insane.
It's, So my best performance with one of them was 40 Dwarf Warriors in one combat phase, start to finish, gone.
This reminds me of the same attack, I guess the same damage output as my Fanatics.
Yeah.
Other than obviously hurting yourself.
Yeah.
But you have a lot more wounds than I do. My unit's only 5 wounds. Yeah. That output will delete units. Like there's very few things that'll survive that.
It is horrific. Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, just what you said about the 40 Warriors. We've all got similar stories with Skullcrackers. As they go into a unit and it's gone by the end of the phase. I had it against nicest guy in Warhammer, Pete. He was playing the Cunning Ruck, and I put the Skullcracker in. I rolled 27 out of 28 attacks, hit with all of them, wounded with 24. He failed almost all the armor saves. I rolled my d6 and took 30 Savage Orc Arrow Boys off the table. Yeah. It was like, average is 14 attacks. Even looking at those numbers, for 200 points, that's phenomenal for what it does.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think we've got potentially a rules clarity from the chat where they're saying that the Black Shard armor doesn't work on mortals, according to the chat. So I think, again, just have a look at the exact wording. If it says wounds and mortal wounds, because if it says and mortal wounds and the wound is treated as a mortal wound, then you get to make that save. If it's a wound and the black armor only does mortal wounds, then you don't get that opportunity. Yeah. So I think just get clarity around the wording, but it sounds like that could be the rule.
Cool.
But Skullcrackers are damage dealing, beautiful,
Yeah.
sensational. If you see them as an opponent, kill it ASAP.
Pretty much.
If you're a Legions player, take millions of them.
Yeah.
This is great.
And this is one of the double-edged swords, though, because I think this is one of the best units in the book. And it's also the only unit that's 100% out of production.
Yep.
So I faced this problem, and I employed the services of the magnificent Blake Kerwick.
Oh, this model looks fantastic.
If you go on Twitter, I've got better photos of it, but that's my Skullcracker. I basically got him to make a big, giant dwarf mech that looks appropriately scary. I've got better photos elsewhere, but it's one of those things where that's pretty much your best bet at this point is converting one, finding. I know some people use it's one of the Chaos Space Marine Demon engines, the Khorne one with the blades and the crab claws.
The Mauler Fiend, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some. It's a 5-star unit. I think they're really, really good. Their damage output's insane.
All right, so if you can find one, get it.
Yeah.
Obviously, as well, if we're talking about tournaments, and while Gabe's conversion/kit bash is amazing, it's not technically legal unless the tournament organizer approves it. So if you're going to go through this effort and you can't find one, it sounds like a great unit. Make sure you talk to your tournament organizer.
Definitely.
100%.
And if you go through the amazing work that Gabe's done here, or in this case, Blake Kerwick, I'm sure, no doubt, that you'll get the big tick.
Yeah.
A good thing to do is so a lot of people they've used the Mauler Fiend. Another one is the Iron Demon is a very similar shape. It just doesn't have the weapons at the front. So some people have put Death Rollers from the 40k Orc at the front of it, along with some Chaos Spikes and stuff to represent the weapon. That's definitely an option. Again, it's still a kit bash, so you still have to double check it. There's plenty of options out there if you want to put in the time and hobby. I'm lucky. I managed to pick one up secondhand off a friend recently, and I painted and built him up. And I had one back in the day as well, but the less said about that poor model, the better. He was he got dropped once and was never the same again.
Aren't we all?
But yeah, 5-star, 100% agree with Gabe on everything. 5-star model, it's fantastic. Always include one in the army if you can.
All right, so it sounds like we've got some really cool war machines, and it sounds like there's a whole range of different things they can do. And it sounds like I think we've got some clear winners, but I think ultimately it comes down to the points allocation and how you want to build a list. Which probably brings us to battalions, which is going to be an easy one because you've only got 3. You've got the Black Shard Warhost, you've got the Executioner's Herd, and then you've got the Artillery Train. Do you guys take any of these 3? We probably don't have to go to all the detail on them, but are you running them and why? Or if you're not running them, why aren't you? So maybe, Gabe, I'll go to you first. Are you running any of these 3?
I do not run any battalions. The problem being is that all of them in their own ways require you to take subpar. Well, I shouldn't say subpar, but like not optimum units. So you look at Black Shard Warhost, you have to take a Castellan, you have to take a Standard Bearer, and you have to take 2 units of Iron Sworn, which is a pretty big cost when I usually wouldn't take any of those units. The Execution Herd, I know there are some people that love it. I look at it and I see, again, we've got shar'tor, which is a huge, huge cost. We've got Bull Centaur Renders, which are not as good as some other units. And then you've got the Artillery Train where you have to take an Iron Demon, which I usually wouldn't typically do. And then you have to take another 3 War Machines. And there's not many lists that I would usually choose to take a total of 4, like Iron Demon and then 3 other War Machines. And so for me, I look at them, I look at the benefits that are offered by them, and the cost is a little bit too high for what I would like out of a battalion.
They sound like what? Because they're all expensive. They're all around the 120 to 160 mark. But then it sounds like they're not bloated, but certainly the tax of having to include extra units that you wouldn't traditionally build. That's taking away from your Kadais, taking away from the things that really you're building a list around. Rhys, would you do you have a similar feel about this?
Yeah, 100%. So the execution herd I mentioned at the start is it looks fun on paper. I think if you play it right, it's definitely a fun list to bring to an event. I don't think you'll go 5-0 with it, but you could definitely. It's definitely a way to shake up the format. And if you play it smart, you might be able to get some work with it. But you're going to be taking the execution herd, and then you're going to be taking 12 Kadai, and the Torque and the execution, the Torque and the Kadai are going to be doing more work than the battalion anyway. So why bother? The Black Shard Warhost is just not that good. You need to not move for one of the effects to even work. And the Wrath Train is probably the only one I would consider taking, because if I'm going a full gun line in a more static players pack, I could definitely see having 3 magma cannons sitting on the back line, shooting into the middle of the table and just taking units off. And your Demon Smith not having to be tied down near those war machines, and the Iron Demon able to just run around shooting shots as well, can really open up some options. But again, you're taking a suboptimal option when you could just, for 320 less points than that, not take the battalion and take a Skullcracker instead.
Fair enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. So it's good to know that if you like any of the battalions, awesome, take it. But it sounds like for these two particular players, some of the unit choices are a bit of a tax, and the tax is too high compared to the units they want to run. So have a look. If it suits your play style, awesome to you, but maybe not worth it right now. The last question I have from a list building point of view, so I think we've got a really good understanding of leaders and units and behemoth / artillery, is your ally pool. Now, I'm actually not too sure who you ally with, but without going into, I guess, too much detail, because I'm sure you've got probably quite a large pool from a chaos, what are the gaps that you like to fill? I know we've talked about the Sorcerer Lord on Steed and with the epitome, and like, who do you ally with, and what are some of those choices that you look for? Gabe, I'll go to you.
Okay. So for me, there's Chaos is one of those grand alliances where there's a lot of synergy between all the different sub-factions, and a lot of them can ally with each other. So for me, usually there's an abundance of good wizards in Chaos. The other and we've touched on a couple of them. You just touched on a few of them. The other thing that I lean pretty heavily on is in an elite army like this, one of the things that I want is lots of bodies and lots of speed. And so one of the units that I've found as a standout, which is bizarre because on its own it's pretty dog shit. No pun intended, but Chaos Warhounds have won me more games than I would care to admit I've needed Warhounds to help me win. They come out of Monsters of Chaos, so usually that's just single entity large monsters that do a lot of mashing, which I usually wouldn't touch. I'd just take Skullcrackers instead. But one of the units that does sneak into that is Chaos Warhounds, which gives you 10 bodies that can move 16 inches a turn. They're a very effective screen. You don't care if they die. They're great for flanking, for screening. They protect your main force from just getting steamrolled by something horrific like a Bloodthirster or a unit of Zing, or stop them plowing in and just killing all your squishy stuff. So I think at the moment, Chaos Hounds are I've got a bit of a soft spot for them. They've performed very well for me, and I think they're a solid unit in the context of Legion of Azgorh.
Awesome. So we've got the Chaos Warhounds, we've got the Epitome, we've got the Sorcerer Lord. I think you said mounted one. Rhys, what are some of the other ones that you're thinking about?
So yeah, definitely hit on those. So just to sort of fully clarify for everyone at home, I guess, the allies available are Giants, Everchosen, Khorne, Slanesh, Zench, Nurgle, Monsters of Chaos, and Slaves of Darkness.
So maybe it was easier to tell us which ones you
so-
didn't ally with. Just like, it's like we allied with.
Beast of Chaos.
Right.
Beast of Chaos is the biggest one that we miss out on. Now we can get access to things like Zangor Shamans and Gaunt Summoners, etc. But we miss. That's a big hole that we're missing. We miss out on Skaven as well. So we can't double up on our war machines and have warp lightning cannons. That's the face that would. I wish we could. It would be amazing. So in terms of that pool, it's the exact same thing. Like putting 40 Marauders on the table is never a bad option when you're an elite army. Chaos Hounds for objective stealing, the epitome of the Sorcerer Lord. I've been playing Festus. He's tons of fun. Festus's rule isn't limited to Nurgle units, so you can put him next to your Skullcracker or an Iron Demon and pump steam, take wounds, heal them back up in your hero phase. And you also got an option of pumping out, ignoring armor save, lowering their armor save, which helps deal with the Rend on Kadai. You've got for Khorne, you've got Scar Bloodwrath, who's just a cheeky with these new resummon ability. You can just throw him into a unit, let him die, and then potentially resummon him out and steal an objective. Karanak, get 5 free Hounds on the table with his new rule. There's like Gabe said, the Chaos has a lot of little synergies that we can bring to the table with our allies list. And it's really down to player choice on what they want to build around on the table.
It sounds like you spot for choice. I think ultimately you spot for choice, and I think Gabe called that a few times. If you've got the Kadai build and you've got these 12 flying amazing units, you want something that can keep up with them. So thinking about I guess what I guess complements and synergizes with your army the best, or potentially plugs a hole. And again, Gabe, you mentioned earlier about the Warhounds. It's a nice little screening unit. Rhys, you've added a lot of value. But it's really just what you like. And I think you guys again are really spot for choice.
Yeah.
That's list building, and I think what's really exciting is that we have a lot of choices and there's a lot of direction. There's a lot of armies that are single focused or not a lot of customization. This particular faction has a lot to play around with, and then as we kind of drill in a little further, you can customize it even more. So do you guys have command traits you can pull from, and without going into all of them, are there ones that stand out for you? Gabe, I'll throw it to you.
Yep. So the standout one, we get a chart with 3 command traits, and one of them is a built-in just flat neg 1 to hit in combat, which when you put it on a Torok makes them very, very survivable. When you combine them with one of the other items that they can have, an artifact, sorry. But that's probably the best command trait in my mind. Flat neg 1 to hit in combat, which is where you want to be with the Torok to begin with, running in and smacking some heads. It's a very good command trait.
Rhys, thoughts?
100% the exact same. The other 2 are just too inconsistent for what they do. That one, it's always there. You get it in combat, and you start, stopping them from hitting you. Fantastic.
Fair enough. What about artifacts? Do you guys? Maybe the question is, what artifacts would you choose? Whether it's, do you even have an artifact pool, or from Malign Sorcery, which are some of the ones that I guess synergize or help your army a bit better? So I guess first off, do you have an artifact pool?
We have 3 artifacts. Again, there's only one that's really the best at standing out. The best is a standout, rather, is the Black Armor of Bazarak the Cruel. It's a 5+ wound and mortal wound save. So you slapped all in the Torok with -1 to hit, and suddenly your big damage 3 axe is not going anywhere anytime soon against anything but the most dedicated monsters. In terms of Realmscape effects, you've got the Ignix Cloak, you've got the Go Feather Charm for another -1 to hit, +1 inch move.
So let me ask you, you guys, you've both told me that battalions aren't really your thing. So we're only going to have one artifact. Yeah. Is that a Legion specific artifact? better than what you can pull from Alliance Sorcery? Like, do you guys really like that? Or would you go to like a, Eighth of Quartz Brooch to get additional command points? Or, are we thinking about, the Ethereal Amulet? Where do you guys stand on that one choice? Gabe, I'll go to you, and then Rhys will come back to you.
So for me, usually the artifact is going to be going on the Torok. That's usually because in scenarios that need wizards or artifacts to hold objectives, all my other characters are going to be wizards. So I'll have a Demon Smith and I'll have an allied sorcerer or a wizard from another Chaos faction. So the artifact is almost always going on the Torok. And basically that artifact is whatever is going to accentuate and capitalize on the strengths of the Torok. It's already got enough damage dealing, I think. Damage 3 axe is pretty solid with Ren 2. So usually it'll come down to defensive artifacts, and Ignax Scales is good, a 4-up against mortal wounds, but a 5-up against everything after your 4+ save. So you get your 4-up armor, you get your 5-up after save, and then you get Black Shard armor after that. So the first one that makes it through there, you're ignoring again. It makes him very, very hard to kill for a 7-wound character. So that's the build that I think is probably the most consistent. There are more like Ignax Scales, you got a 4-up against it, but it's a lot more situational. Some armies just don't do mortal wounds. So I think a 5-up against everything is better than a 4-up against some things.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I run a Troggoth Hag, and the Ignax Scales is good, but then there's other damage that comes through other ways. If you could get that 5-up on both sides, that's rock solid. Rhys, is there anything from Alliance Sorcery that you really like, or have we kind of made a decision from internally?
Yeah, it's almost 99% of the time it's going to be the Armor of Bazarak the Cruel. The only other one that's really worth trying is the Griff Feather Charm. I found just the +1 inch movement and -1 to hit is pretty good. But again, then you lose all mortal wound save options, so you suddenly become very fragile against a lot of different other armies. That's a meta choice. It's down to sort of what you think you're going to see at the top tables. If you're going to see, Flesh Eater Courts and you're going to see Skaven floating around a lot, then maybe bringing your mortal wound save is best. If you're going to be seeing a lot of daughters and a lot of high volume of attacks, getting that ward save on instead is paramount. It swings and roundabouts, but I think the ward save is 99% of the time the better option.
Well, especially if you're only taking a couple of heroes. Like I'm running around with like 5 or 6 heroes, but you don't have that redundancy. So, making sure that those 2 to 3 heroes stay on the table. Do you have a spell law?
No, but all our wizards get access to Fireball.
It's kind of cool.
It's something.
It's something.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
it's just a cheeky extra magic missile we can put out. Yeah.
I mean, that's an easy choice, right? Like you don't have to go in. Let's work out the best additional spell to choose. Oh, we'll take Fireball.
Yeah.
Is it fair to assume that you can only cast Fireball once? So if you've got 3 casters, it's no different to Mystic Shield and Arcane Bolt.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Good to know. That's fair. Do you guys dip into the endless spell pool? And if so, which endless spells synergize well with the Azgorh legions? Gabe, do you touch them?
I think the latest round of endless spells has added a lot. You've got the dinghy, which can transport big units of infantry around the table quickly. You've also got the bridge, which has its uses. So I think mobility, anything that counters mobility in a movement 4 army is a good spell.
And I think the FAQ to the Uber driver, Bringy Dingy, doesn't impact you as much because you're not someone who wants to get out of the Uber and then charge straight away. You can come out and just pew pew.
Yeah,
exactly it. It's like we shank one guy on the way through and then we're like not moving anyway. That's fine. Geminids. Geminids is a fantastic spell for the army. You shoot it across the table, debuff all their hits, and then put in your Kadai, which are quite fragile. You can do a lot of work. But yeah, the dinghy. Purple Sun might see play now that it's cheaper.
Gabe's
maybe
like Gabe's.
No,
like,
that was a. I haven't thought about Purple Sun in a long time, so I was more like, oh yeah.
Yeah, it is a thing now. It's always Purple Sun. No, I don't have 100 points spare, but now it's like it could be an option. Chronomatic Cogs is
so
it's not really worth it in this army, but
So what's the hole that that an endless spell's going to bring? So obviously the bringy dingy and the bridge are great movement spells, and we've already said that the movement in legions isn't that strong. Is it? It sounds like you've got a lot of mortal wound damage, so maybe things some certain mortal wounds is not that important. What are the holes that you're looking to plug? I guess from endless spells.
I think one of the things that I'm looking at the moment with a couple of lists is things like Palisade, those big footprint spells where you can go, okay, I'm going to block up that lane of movement, or just get in the way and stop someone from smashing your face in that you'd rather not punch you in the head. The damage, it's one of those things where with your endless spells, you can either plug a weakness or just go all in on a strength. And sometimes those armies that have Geminids and the pendulum and stuff like that, they just stack on mortal wounds on top of mortal wounds to the point where it's overwhelming. But I think a lot of the utility endless spells are probably a bit more, I think you'll get a bit more worth out of them in more situations. I think those two movement spells that have come out, I would use them in every game against every opponent. I would find a use for them. Whereas sometimes Pendulum, you might not have a good target for Pendulum, and it might just be a waste of a cast kind of thing. So,
do you think something like Maelstrom would be good? I mean, it's a cheap endless spell, considering you don't have a lot of casters. And if you come up against like a Zench or a Gloomspike Gits who have a lot of spell casting, it's like, cool, he's a 10, I think it's 10 points. You throw it out 10 points, and then it's going to wreck face, and it's playing to your weakness, but it also messes around with my spell casting.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things. Realistically, you're going to have 2, maybe 3 unbinds in your army. Typically, like I usually only have 2 or 3. And so anything that you can throw out that stacks on top of that plugs a weakness in the army. So that's, I think the Maelstrom's a good shout. And for 10 points, it's like, that's pocket change at the end of the list kind of thing. So.
Cool. No, that's good. Look, I imagine something like Cogs could help with the +2 movement. Or if you've got a cast like a Demon's, I don't know if a Demon Smith cast.
Demon Smith's cast,
yeah. I mean, one spell. Their spell's definitely worth using more so, but yeah.
You could rewind time with the Demon Smith, and there's some cool stuff there. But I reckon for you guys, and I'm clearly math hammering here, something like the Uber driver or the bridge would just be so incredible, because you just move those dwarves right up in your face.
Yeah.
You've got the artillery behind you, which is bombarding, and these solid lines, whether it's Kadai, whether it's your fire glaives, and you've got them in range early.
Yeah.
But I'm making it all up. Who knows?
Yeah. No, that's all exactly right. That's definitely the 3 that you look at the first to when you're building the army. 100%.
There you go. So we've kind of customized our force a little bit, and I think I don't know if I've missed something, but I guess the last piece that I really want to explore with you both is, the tactical piece. How do you use this army? What's the advice you would give a player? So maybe start off. How do you best play with the legions of Azgorh? Like, what type of army is it? An aggressive army? Is it a counter-attack army? Like, how do you play with these guys? Rhys.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the army, I like to play Chaos Dwarfs as a counter-attack control list. So a lot of what you're doing with the army is zoning off or giving them bad options for where they want to move, or forcing them to want to roll high for a double turn, and just putting them as much pressure as you can with the limited range options that you have in the army. And at the same time, you want to be bullying them with your big threats and making them focus on those whilst the rest of your army starts scoring points. So that's where the Demon Smith and the Sorcerer Lord or the Epitome comes into play. Is you're casting Ash Storm 36 inches across the table to lock down their best unit every turn. You're throwing Kadai 14 inches up the table and then screening off their entire army with 50 mil base fire demons, or even better, charging them, and then just starting to take toys off. You're putting 30 fire glaives on an objective and then telling them to deal with mortal wounds every turn from then onwards. It's an army that really rewards playing a list that can function in a lot of phases, but also really wants to grab the playstyle by the reins in a lot of ways, and just sort of push things like push the question more than most other armies. Putting it back on the opponent to sort of make the mistake and you just taking them off, or forcing them to not make a choice and then you winning by default because you've got 30 dwarves standing on a hill the entire game.
Yeah. And Gabe?
Yeah, so I've got one of the reasons that I kind of enjoy Chaos Dwarves and that they've kind of caught my interest and kept my interest is because they are quite a dynamic army. They've got some high quality shooting that you don't necessarily have a heap of, so you've got to make choices with that and make sure you get your points worth. You've got some ripper combat units. You've got great heroes. My play style with this army, I mean, it's the same with every army. It's number one thing is the scenario. If you're not playing the scenario, you can wipe your opponent out. Cool. You haven't won. Chaos Dwarves play scenarios quite well because they're pretty tough to kill. They can get where they need to go. I usually... so I lean pretty heavily on Kadai. That big unit of 12 Kadai is in almost every single one of my lists. And with that particular unit, it's all about sending it into fights that it can win, avoiding fights that it can't, and you'll get your points back. Sacrificing a unit entirely to score an objective for one turn of the game, just getting points on the board, even if it costs you 10 riflemen, everything's kind of expendable in the name of victory. And I think it's all about, like, a lot of the units have a very specific role, and it's about getting them into a position or putting them in a position where they can fulfill their job the best that they can. So if there's a horde of infantry, you wouldn't necessarily, let's say 20 Sequitors. I would never willingly throw 12 Kadai into 20 Sequitors because they will lose that fight every day of the week, purely because of, you got 4 up or 3 up rerollable saves. You're just never going to get through that unit. So yeah, it's a challenge because it's flexible enough to take on a lot of different armies, but depending on who you're playing, you have to change your play style, and you have to change, I guess, the speed and intensity that you play. Sometimes you got to rush in turn 1, smash up as much as you can and just start killing. Other games, depending on who you're fighting, you want to sit back, you want to be really cagey, you want to just tag objectives and stay as far away from them as you can. So for me, it's a good tactical challenge. But I think I think every unit in your army has to pull its weight, and I think you need to try and maximize the role that they do and give them the best opportunity to get good results.
And I think the one thing that really excites me about this is you mentioned right at the start of the stream is that you don't have a lot of synergy within the army. So it sounds like you have a lot of independent units. So it means that you're not this Death Star. You're not an army that requires one unit with 2 support heroes and they have to go as a little group. You have the tools to respond and not have to sacrifice too much, potentially. Depends on the build. Obviously, we talked about Demon Smiths working with some of the war machines, but in theory, a lot of your units are solo. So play to its strengths. I like that.
Yeah.
I imagine this is very similar to the old Empire back in the day, where you've got war machines from behind the battle line just shooting the hell out of you. You've got some rock solid knights, which are your Kadai, which are very tough to take down, can do some damage, and then you've got this durable kind of like anvil that just kind of sits there and takes it and dishes it out as much. I really like it. You might have even sold me the Chaos Dwarfs. I may be back. I may be starting an army. I may have just started a Sylvaneth army, but I'm just throw those trees in the bin and start with the Chaos Dwarfs. This sounds very cool. What advice would you give a new player? So if I was going to start for the first time, I've thrown my Sylvaneth in the bin. Who cares about pre-orders this week about the book? I'm going to start a new Chaos Dwarf army. What advice would you give me as a new player, Rhys?
Definitely I think I mentioned it right at the start of the stream, but I'll say it again, is pick up the Execution Herd and the Black Shard War Host. It's a good starting point. Get some extra fire glaives, throw them on the Iron Sworn. That gives you a huge army to start with, and start adding war machines to taste and play the army from there. The biggest thing is learning how to maximize each of the units to get the best out of what they need to do. That's the biggest learning curve for the army, and from there you just got to learn to you've got to learn to put up with the fact that it's a fake army and people will call you on it. So as long as you can roll with that punch, you'll be fine.
Well, it's not a fake army anymore. You're in the general.
It's not a fake army anymore. Exactly. It's
fake
fine.
Army anymore.
You'll still catch it.
I feel like you guys need to kind of band together and get a shirt made up that has like hashtag like this, hashtag real army. You guys are legit now. Hashtag you're a real army now.
But yeah, exactly. It just start off with a good core selection of models, and then learn how to best utilize them on the table, and buy a 12 Kadai as fast as possible. Gabe?
Yeah, so if someone came to me and was like, I want to start playing Chaos Dwarves, I would say, I'd say Torok, Fireglaves, Kadai, Skullcracker. Those 4 units are the core of every single one of my armies.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say play lots, practice lots, because it's an army that you got to play the scenario and you got to understand the mechanics of the game. It's not Gristlegore. You can't just push one zombie dragon across the board and that will compensate for some tactical decisions. I'm not saying there's, Flesh Eater Courts was a bad example, but I think it's an army that rewards player skill.
Yes.
And I think that it's a very dynamic army. And if you practice lots, you try different stuff, you're always innovating, and you learn other people's armies. I mean, that's pretty generic advice for everyone. I think it's not a specific Chaos Dwarf thing, but I think it's particularly true with Chaos Dwarves.
Yeah.
Practice. Get into the habit of target priority. Get your movement phase down. It can be one piece of advice I would give with Fireglaves. If you stand still, you get reroll hits of 1. I never use that rule because with a 4-inch movement, you need to be planning 3 turns ahead because you need to be somewhere late game. And if you don't start in turn 1 or 2, you're just not going to get there. So I would say you've got to be thinking a couple of turns ahead. You got to have a game plan, and you got to be prepared to adapt. And yeah, I think it's a good army, and I don't. I ran out of things to say. Sorry. Ooh.
We there?
Anthony, if you can hear us, we
Hold
can
on.
hear you.
Yeah, your sound's dropped out, man. No.
Nope.
We're all good.
Hey.
There we go. Yep.
Mac? I was just saying, we've also got the new command abilities as well, where it allows you to roll 1 hit in the shooting phase. So we know that
Yeah,
command
exactly.
points are restrictive. So if you are able to find a way to get additional command points, whether it's at plus 50 to your army list or
Yeah.
something like Eighth Court's Broach to kind of generate some back,
Yeah.
that could mitigate, keep moving those fire glaives and the reroll ones to hit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
The only time you're really rerolling to hit with fire glaives is if you're already in combat on the objective you need, because you're not moving at that point. So you might as well get the reroll ones at that point.
or you get the Uber driver, he picks them up and brings them over
Or
to the objective, and you didn't move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other advice I would give is go speak to your bank and get a second finance, either credit card or mortgage, or set up a separate account that your partner doesn't know about. Because
tonight's Thursday, Powerball's on, you're fine.
Is there any other advice or any other things that you'd want to share with the community to wrap this thing up? All of the wisdom, all of the advice, all of the great times you've had with this army. What's your parting gift, Rhys? What would you say to the world?
I'd have to say that I've had the most fun in Age of Sigmar of all the armies I played has been with Chaos Dwarfs. They're a dynamic army. They have a wonderful set of rules and a feel on the table, as well as narratively in fantasy and in the small amounts of fluff they have in their army book. The price tag might throw you off, but I definitely would recommend having a look at them and seeing if they suit up to you. Even if you have to proxy to test them on the table, I guarantee that if you do dip your toe in or even dive head first in, you won't be disappointed. They are a wonderful army to use.
That's a really good piece of advice is to proxy and test before you buy. Gabe, what's your parting gift to the world?
I'd say this army has a lot of obscure special rules and stuff like that. Learn your scrolls, use every rule because you're going to need all of them. But it is a very rewarding army to play. Once you get your head around everything and you start pulling out those little tricks, it's a lot of fun. So I highly recommend it.
Look, on behalf of the Age of Sigmar Council of 13, I would like to welcome the Legion of Azgorh to the real army meta. No longer do you carry around the hashtag of fake army or fake dwarves or whatever other name that is being thrown at you. You are legit, you are real, and we welcome you to the competitive scene as our new overlords of long-range shooting. If people want to find you, where can they find you? I do have some links below, but Rhys, are you on the Twitterverse, and where can they find you?
Yes, I'm over on Twitter at Tanfew. That's TANFEW. I post on there, mostly just follow people and do army updates as I'm going along. I also have a small Facebook page that I operate with army reports. Not nearly as big on the social media side of things as Gabe is, but that's over at Slapper-Wargaming. So if you search that up on Facebook, you should be able to get redirected in there. And yeah, I'm also on the Age of Sigzar, which is the main Chaos Dwarf fan page on Facebook,
Age
I guess
of
you'll say.
Sigmar.
Age of Sigzar, as an Age of Sigmar, but you drop the Mar for ZHAR, which is the name of a Chaos Dwarf city. So a little fluff thing there. Yeah, I'm over on there. I post regularly and follow all the hobby projects. It's the great community there. Big shout out to all the guys there. And same with the Measured Gaming is I'm based on that page as well and follow along with all those boys. They're good value. So
shout out to the Measured boys. And they've been in the chat supporting you and giving you shade.
Good. Yeah, tell them they all suck and I hate them and I'll see them on the weekend probably.
It has been funny, actually. The chat has, I think someone jumped back in the chat and they're like, how is this show still going? This is not even a real army. Well, but look, they're coming around slowly. I think you've made Wes is a believer now. He's going to come on board. He reckons he's buying up all the Chaos Dwarves. So Gabe, bring us home. If people want to find you, you seem to have something going on. You have a place to find.
I do.
The work.
So on Twitter, I'm at the Runax. On Facebook, I run the Runax Wargaming, which is a kind of weekly blog, weekly hobby diary. We do all kinds of battle reports and events and all that kind of thing. So I'm pretty active on there. Trying to get more active on Twitter. Still getting the feel of it. But yeah, on the socials, I'm always happy to chat about Warhammer and all things chaos. Just Warhammer, Age of Sigmar in general. I'll chat about anything really.
And Gabe's also the tournament organizer for Australia's largest teams event.
Yeah,
that's sold out.
Yeah, we sold out in like 45 minutes, which was pretty wild. So I run the Runax Team Championships, which is a 4-man team event. I say every year. It ran last year, and we're running it again this year, but I'm counting it.
So it's an annual event.
It's annual event, yeah.
It's an annual teams event.
Yeah, so it's an annual teams event. This year sold out. I'm currently trying to get some more tickets available, but I'll have more updates on that on Saturday. So yeah, it's going to be a hell of a time. It's in the first weekend in November, and it should be really good fun. Last year was great fun, and we've just about doubled in size. Well, not doubled, but we've got a lot more people than I was expecting. So,
well, I've signed up. I bought tickets literally the first day. Bought a flight before the ticket. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you both. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions from the Chaos Dwarf players. They're going to want to know how to be the best, and this video has been awesome to hear about your hints, tips, tricks, and experience on using this very unique faction where it's quite hard to find all the information you need. So on behalf of the internet and the Council of 13, guys, welcome and thank you both, Gabe and Rhys.
Thank you, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks, guys.